Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, February 8th, 2016. We're getting into the month here. A lot of stuff going on today. Phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Daniel is sitting in our control room today, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. For those of you who, like me, have significant others in your life, Sunday is Valentine's Day, so you better start making your plans now. And obviously yesterday, the last Sunday, we had the Super Bowl, the Broncos over the Panthers here. And I didn't watch much of the Super Bowl. I used to watch it a lot more when I worked on commercials that showed up on the Super Bowl because that's sort of like the big event for commercial producers. They put their best out there because it's a huge media buy. So I didn't really tune in all that much, but I did notice for the short time I was watching, it seemed very heavily propagandistic towards supporting the military and soldiers and war. And yeah, football is an abstract form of warfare. But it's a little troubling as we see all this talk about drafting women into combat and all the rest that's going on. Now, over in Syria, Assad's army in the northwest front is unstoppable. They're continuing to liberate more towns from the U.S.-sponsored terrorist groups. And basically, they're just driving them right up to the border. And all of these hired mercenaries, they're skedaddling, because they're not motivated to stand and fight to the death. They're there for a paycheck, and the only way you get to spend your paycheck is you got to be alive. So they're skedaddling and heading on out there. Now, John Kerry, over the last couple of weeks, was saying that Russia's bombing of civilians was all to blame for the unhappiness and the failure of the peace talks. And today, he's kind of shifted. He's now out there saying that, well, it's really the fault of the rebels in opposition. They won't sit down at the peace talks. And it's kind of an interesting little transition. And it may be that Kerry is trying to pull away from exposing U.S. involvement in what's going on in Syria, or he may be grandstanding for political reasons, and we're going to get into that a little bit later in the show here. But in the Turkish media, they're out there saying they're expecting a full escalation in Syria leading to World War III. They're all hot and bothered to go. Let's start flinging mushroom clouds on each other. Iran is responding to Saudi Arabia's overtures of an invasion of Syria by saying it would be suicide because they're not doing very well over in Yemen against a bunch of farmers. And for Saudi Arabia to think they can take on Syria, Iran, and Russia is kind of ridiculous until you realize that behind Saudi Arabia will be the United States of America. Now, apparently right after the Geneva peace talks fell apart, Kerry was telling Syrian aid workers that it may be over. The Syrian rebels are toast, and dropping hints saying that push comes to shove, the U.S. isn't ready to go head-to-head against Russia over Syria. And he's now moving the blame onto the rebels, saying it was all their fault for all that Syria has suffered. And again, it may be trying to de-link the U.S. from what is turning out to be a foreign policy disaster, or something else may be cooking on. But apparently John Kerry's throwing in the towel and saying, what do you want us to do? Go to war with the Russians? Which some people in the U.S., yeah, that's what they want. John McCain, yeah, let's go to war with the Russians. Take your kids and send them off. We'll have fun watching from back here safely in our bunkers. Of course, what may be in the offing is a proxy war that the U.S. wants to pretend they're not behind, just like the U.S. continues to pretend they're not behind Saudi Arabia's attacks on Yemen. So they're shaping up to be Saudi Arabia, covertly backed by the U.S., versus Russia, Assad, and Nasrallah, supposedly against Daesh. Now, Erdogan is getting very upset over the fact that the U.S. is sending him a mixed message saying, we need you to go after Assad for us, but, leave the Kurds alone, because ultimately the plans to balkanize both Iraq and Syria involve the creation of an independent Kurdistan. And Erdogan doesn't want that. He's saying, now, the U.S. must choose between Turkey and the Syrian Kurds. You can't have it both ways. What the U.S. response is going to be, we don't know yet. Now, up in Europe, along the Russian frontier, we're seeing the biggest NATO buildup since the Cold War. We know the U.S. government's budget for next year is multiplying military spending in Europe by 4 times. So they're definitely building up there to not have a hot war. They don't want a hot war. They want a new Cold War that justifies taking more money from you and building up weapons to wag at the Russians. Because they missed the old Cold War, where they could just take your money and the lives of your children and you wouldn't complain about it. All they have to do is say commies at you and you would wet yourself and fling your babies onto the bayonets. And they want to go back to those glory days of the 1950s and 1960s. They want to go back to a world where they can just say Russians and you will obediently wet yourself and give them your money and the lives of your children. I don't think it's going to work. But then they don't listen to me much over there in Washington, D.C. Now, over in the Donbass, the deputy commander of the Donetsk People's Republic staff, Eduard Basarin, is reporting in an interview in Sputnik that they have uncovered a plan by Kiev to attack the Donbass and try and recapture. Poroshenko's in serious trouble. He's not able to grab Lugansk, Donetsk, the Donbass, certainly not take back Crimea. And support for him coming from the West is beginning to crumble. And he may be looking at getting ousted so they can put a new strongman in there who will do what the West wants him to do, provoke a war with Russia. Now, over in Great Britain, as you know, they're coming up on their referendum regarding whether they're going to fully merge with the European Union or go their own way. And the people of Great Britain, they love Europeans. They love being able to visit Europe. They do not want to be tangled up in the European Central Bank or have a government in Brussels dictating what to do on their island. And David Cameron is out there saying, absolutely we have to do this. Nigel Farage has set up a cross-party movement saying, no, this is ridiculous. And he's pointing out it's costing the British taxpayer £55 million a day to be in the European Union, for which Britain is getting absolutely nothing back except a flood of refugees. And David Cameron is out there saying, well, in this new globalist world, Great Britain is really too small to run its own international trade deals. We've got to merge with the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. We've got to merge with the global economic model. And Nigel Farage is saying, that's ridiculous. Britain has much to sell, much to offer. They can make whatever deals they want, and they're better off doing it on their own. Now, you're probably aware there's a movie out now regarding the American Olympic star Jesse Owens, who was the star of the 1936 Olympics. And this film basically promotes an illusion, a bit of propaganda, where everybody said, oh, Jesse Owens proved the master race wasn't there, and Adolf Hitler was angry and snubbed him and walked on out. And it's a lie that's been repeated so many times that pretty much everybody thinks it's true. But it turns out that Adolf Hitler did meet Jesse Owens after his gold medal and congratulated him and shook his hand. And apparently Jesse Owens had a photo of that. And so now this veteran sports reporter in Germany is coming forward to saying, look, all this thing about Hitler throwing a tantrum and walking on out, it's an outright lie. Hitler was actually very much the gentleman and statesman and congratulated Jesse Owens on his Olympic win. How much more do you have to be lied to before you understand your government lies to you about everything? We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. Let's talk about the economy. As you know, they did not have the best of Mondays on the American stock market. The plunge protection team did intervene at the very end to try and drive the Dow back above 16,000 and protect all those banks who've been part of the plunge protection team, because when there is a serious correction, those institutions will be insolvent overnight, and then the derivatives will kick in. So they're stuck. They have to keep rigging the market, and the more they keep rigging the market, the more and more it discredits trust in the American financial system. And that trust is already becoming a problem. That's why Germany and all these other countries want their gold back. They don't trust the United States financial system and government anymore, and with darn good reason. Now, rough day on the stock market all around. European banks, bond and stock market went down. Deutsche Bank really took a major hit. They were down 11%. That's crash territory over there. Now, the German arm of Canada's Maple Bank has been shut down because apparently it's too deep in debt and it is suffering a major derivatives exposure. And they said, best to just shut it down right now. Peter Schiff is out there lambasting President Obama, saying he's peddling fiction because the long-term unemployed in America now has topped 100 million people. 1/3 of the population of this country has been unable to find a job in a very long time, but Obama's still out there saying, oh, the unemployment's only 5%. I wouldn't lie to you, I'm the president. And yes, he will. They're still out there trying to convince us everything is fine, there's an economic recovery, we have 45 million Americans on food stamps. While the Federal Reserve continues to plunder the American people's wealth with impunity. Paul Craig Roberts has come on out and said the U.S. payroll job reports, they seem to be nothing more than just propaganda, and he's absolutely right. It's propaganda, trying to convince you everything is fine, and if you personally are going hungry, losing your home, losing your business, it's your fault. You're just being lazy, that's it. Another story out of Investment Watch blog talking about Obama's proposal to tax oil, claiming that it will strengthen the economy, saying that's insane. He's a lunatic. Adding more taxes to a struggling economy does not make the economy better. Manufacturing and agriculture are the engine that powers an economy. Taxes are load. And if you put too much load on any machine, it will stutter to a halt, and that's what's going on now. Now, a little bit of good news. This is coming out of Sputnik News. White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest has admitted that there probably will not be an agreement on the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership for the rest of Obama's term in office, which is really good. Now, you know, they signed the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but it still has to be ratified by the legislatures of all the involved countries, and that is looking to be a major fistfight. Iran is no longer going to accept dollars for oil. They're demanding euros instead. And Iran is already sending back out to the world about half of what they were delivering prior to the sanctions. And that cannot help but put pressure, downward pressure on oil prices even more. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Joseph in Oklahoma. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, I have an idea about that, how to put the Americans back to work.
Yes.
I hear like all this stuff about like people say, oh, if you tax the rich or the 1%, then they won't be able to have any money for jobs. But here's my thing, like, isn't a job just, you really don't need somebody to create a job because, I mean, the way Hitler got back Germany to work, he brought back 8 million or 6 million, is he took away minimum wage. And what was really the currency of the German people was their work.
You're exactly right there. Now, first of all, I want to back up to what you said. This idea that letting the rich keep their money will generate jobs, that's a revival of the old trickle-down theory of economics that was a hallmark of Reagan and Bush, and clearly it does not work. The rich keep their money, they move it offshore, they buy themselves lives of luxury. They're not into job creation because their entire financial empire is built on usury. And that's why they're not creating huge numbers of jobs. Now, as for what Adolf Hitler did, it wasn't that he challenged the idea of a minimum wage. In fact, wages went up in Germany. What he did is he kicked out the private central bank imposed on Germany by the Treaty of Versailles at the end of World War I, and he replaced that fiat currency from the private central bank with a new German currency that was denominated in terms of hours of work. So the labor became the commodity for a commodity-based currency, and it just lit up Germany. They called it the German miracle. Time magazine made Adolf Hitler their man of the year for this amazing miracle he pulled off in Germany. And, of course, that was a threat to all the nations that had private central banks, because people around the world were saying, look, this works great. It's working for the German people. It's working for the German nation. Why aren't we copying that system here? And that was basically the reason why they went in and destroyed Germany a second time.
Finelli, I think it was MSNBC or something, they had Goldman Sachs on there, and they were talking about Bernie Sanders, and they were saying, oh, socialism doesn't work and everything, blah, blah. And it's like...
Well, neither does fascism.
But it's like the way they talk about socialism, like, oh, it will never, like they're scared of it.
Of course they're scared of it. Of course they're scared of it. I mean, when the communist revolution happened in the Soviet Union, the money junkies in the U.S. immediately mounted a major propaganda campaign about the commies were bad, the commies were coming to get you, because they were absolutely terrified of an economic system that was founded on the idea that everybody in the country, deserves an equal share of life's blessings, which is really what communism is all about. And they were absolutely scared of it because the rise of the Soviet Union started giving people an alternative to the fascistic system they were living under at that time. And what came out of the Soviet Union that was positive is it did motivate the money junkies in the U.S. to kind of pull back and allow decent wages and salaries. And so while the communists never took over the United States, they did have an indirect beneficial effect on the quality of life in the United States. Well, then the Soviet Union collapsed. Communism went away, and the fascists stood up and said, all right, now we can go back to just looting everybody and putting it all in our pockets.
But not only that, socialism and communism, it gives the people, an incentive to do for themselves, because you give them the resources, and now they just do it like what you're seeing in Russia.
Well, unfortunately, the Soviet Union kind of made a mockery of Marx's original theories, which is why it ultimately collapsed. Yeah. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, and we'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the economy, and rents all across America are skyrocketing. They got you now. And they'll charge whatever rent they can get away with. And it's just another way of you working your life away and the wealth flowing to the money junkies, which is really what they are. Russia, China, and Iran are all planning to move to a gold-backed currency. That will be a major blow to the U.S. dollar. And what's really interesting, the European Union sanctions against Russia are crumbling. Officially, they're going to remain. The United States attitude is, we don't care how much it's hurting you in Europe. We need to get those gosh darn Ruskies, and that's all that counts. But more and more European Union companies and governments are finding ways around the sanctions because they're sick and tired of having to suffer the consequences of U.S. imperial aims. European Union is also going to crack down on Bitcoin and any other anonymous form of money. They want to know what you're buying at all times. It's also part of the campaign against cash. They want you to use a plastic card so they know what you're buying, to make sure you're not buying something they don't approve of. All right, let's grab a couple more phone calls here. Jeff in New York, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hey, Mike. First phone caller. Hello?
Yes, you're on the air.
Yeah, so I was wondering, to what extent you think Sanders and Trump are insiders?
Well, Sanders certainly more so than Trump. Trump is very much a political outsider. In fact, more than a few times he's made comments that I think come from a dangerous level of political naivete. Too much of his worldview is what he sees on corporate media, and he hasn't picked up on it. Sanders is a bit of an insider, but he's certainly not liked by Wall Street because of his socialistic leanings. Do
you think Hillary has a chance to win?
Only if the Diebold machines keep on stealing the elections for her. Frankly, I think insiders in the Democratic Party are realizing she's not going to be able to survive to November because of all the scandals are coming back to haunt her. The email scandal isn't going away. Sooner or later, somebody's going to have to acknowledge this question I keep putting out there. Was Hillary Clinton selling U.S. secrets on her private email server and using her charitable foundation to collect and launder the payments? It's an obvious question. Well, we're already hearing that Hillary is threatening that if she's indicted or charged, she's going to blow the whistle on all the dirt the Clintons have been involved in for the last quarter of a century. And she's literally saying, I'll take down the entire government with me. And we'd all like to see it happen. But, of course, Hillary may get really, really depressed or have an accident in a small plane because ultimately the system will protect itself.
Last question. Who do you think is better, Sanders or Trump, for the country?
I think they're both better for the country than the other candidates. It's kind of hard to say. Sanders, I like a lot of what he has to say. I think his popularity, though, isn't that people agree with him so much as Democratic voters are doing an anybody but Hillary kind of approach right now. I think Trump is going to be really great for the country, if only because he's going to shake up the current power elite structure, and that'll open the door for some new blood to get in there with some new ideas. And I'm predicting we're going to see a huge anti-incumbency fever, anti-friend of Israel fever sweeping the country during primary season, and that's going to be a good thing.
All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over here to James in Tokyo. Ohio gozaimasu, o genki desu ka?
Genki desu, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing quite well, thank you.
Good. I had a little problem getting you on GCN Live and on your, Bamboozle, the live video.
Bamuser, yeah.
15 minutes. And I guess you had a problem, and that really affects me because I'm an addict to your show, and I have to go through therapy if I can't see you right away. So,
I look exactly the same. If you need to see my face, just go over to the post office and look at all those wanted posters. Bamuser is saying that they're working just fine. I know there are, unfortunately, sadly, still some issues going on with GCN that they are working on.
Well, I expect you to compensate 25% of my therapy, invite me to your house so I could steal your sword from the wall, and I take clerics. That's just too damn good for me, and
You're right. Well, she's too good for me as well, and I'll let you in on a little secret. That particular sword on the wall is the only non-combat worthy sword I have, but it looks really cool. It was a gift, and so it's on display
cool.
there. It is. It's from.
Hey, you're right about Deutsch. One of my clients was the top guy in Deutsch. He quit, and he was actually an executive vice president level and a market maker. And I said, how could you quit like a $500,000 a year job? And he said, because I don't think it's going to be there. As far as like you always talk about the plunge protection team, and I don't know. Sometimes you don't have the backup for that, and sometimes I think, like, to be a little more fair and balanced, a lot of your information you always take from like Zero Hedge or Investment Watch. I read your website too. I'm an addict.
Well,
for that.
actually, the phrase plunge protection team came out of a Newsweek article all the way back in the 1990s when this group was first put together. Their official name is the President's Working Group on the Markets, and it was called the Plunge Protection Team, and quite a few writers were just commenting that they were out there rigging the markets. They were committing acts which for anybody else would be jailable prison offenses. And, of course, nothing comes out of thin air for free. Every time they intervened to drive the markets up, short sellers were getting absolutely creamed. And it was part of the Clinton administration's goal of using the stock markets as a political banner to convince everybody the economy was doing really, really good. And, of course, we know now that he got his magic federal budget surplus by plundering the Social Security Trust Fund. And
that's true, but I'm just saying you just don't know. You say, oh, the plunge protection team tried to do this, but I'm just saying you don't know because you don't have the facts.
Actually, if you look at the chart during the day and and when the huge upshoves happen. It's not a normal behavior for a fairly trading market. And after a while, you learn to recognize that signature in the data. And the smart thing to do, if they had that option, would be let the market slowly, controlled, sink back down to where the stock prices were supported by the underlying value of the stocks. Unfortunately, they can't do that because they have a huge number of overvalued stocks sitting on their ledgers. And if stock prices were allowed to go back down to where they're supported by the actual value of the stock, most of these institutions would become insolvent overnight. And so they're kind of stuck right now. They've boxed themselves into a real corner, and they have to keep on doing what they're doing.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of insolvency right now, I believe, like in the oil industry and any type of energy infrastructure besides the refinery business.
Well, there's a lot of creative.
That was what I called.
A lot of creative bookkeeping going on. The problem for Wall Street, though, is the derivatives exposure. If they become insolvent, if they default on their credit, there's all these credit default swaps out there that people are going to be banging on the doors of Wall Street. That's why they have all that armored protection built into the sidewalk around Wall Street. They know what the risk is.
Not just that, they moved to like Chicago or something. They wanted to get the hell out of town.
Yeah,
I want to talk about Fukushima.
Certainly.
I went out to my beach house in Ibaraki, Kashima Ibaraki. It's about 120 miles away from Fukushima. And I did a testing with my radiation detector on my water well and my land, and it came out okay. I didn't check any fish because it's too cold to go fishing, but I told you if there was a problem, I would check it out.
Okay, well, if you're getting your water from a well, the chance of it being contaminated without a direct connection is very, very slim. Anyway, James, thank you very much for the phone call. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Kind of an interesting article coming out of Bloomberg saying a record number of investors are piling into oil. Because of the low prices, they figure it's a time to buy in at the low price of the various stocks here, and they're thinking it's going to go up. Now, I'm not sure about that because, as you know, Iran, now that the sanctions have been lifted by the P5+1 deal, Iran is now starting to ship oil. They're already up to a little over half of the delivery rate that they were doing before the sanctions were imposed, and no reason not to go back to 100%. And certainly worse for the United States, they're demanding a payment in euros here. So I am not expecting oil prices to go up anytime soon, except, of course, for Obama wanting to throw a $10 per barrel of oil tax on top of everything, which will be more money for the government and more hardship for everybody else. We're hearing that Chesapeake Energy is now looking at a potential bankruptcy. So, anyway. Let's grab ourselves a phone call here. Andrew in New York. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I want to talk about the education system.
Certainly.
After doing how the education system derives from the Prussian school model is basically turned into an indoctrination system where they indoctrinate the kids today.
Well, that was always the Prussian model. The Prussian model of education was to raise the next generation of children to be useful to the state. And usually that involved making sure that they learned the skills that the economy needed, which I think is a positive thing to do. But it's always been about indoctrinating the children to serve the state.
I mean, even college today, it's like, what's this? Like, you're going to face death in your life, and they're not going to teach you the skill. You're just, like, basically wasting their money.
Well, I agree with you. When I was younger, the Prussian model was certainly true in grade school, a little less so in high school, and when you got to college, that's when you were allowed to have a little bit more intellectual freedom. Today, unfortunately, the Prussian model is being imposed rigidly throughout education, to bow to authority, to do as you're told, I mean, there are varying degrees of the Prussian agenda, but it's definitely out of control right now.
And plus, I used to believe everything what they tell you in public school, but I mean, when you talk about the Holocaust, I was like to myself, that can't be true. I'm like, come on, but I did research and like you were exactly right there. What we've been taught about the Holocaust is like not true.
Oh yeah, I mean, the school curriculum still says that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone assassin of John F. Kennedy. John Wilkes Booth was the lone assassin of Lincoln, and we know that's absolutely not true. And I'm sure that they're out there saying, that Osama bin Laden did 9/11. The purpose of public school is to make you think what the government finds it useful for you to think.
About the Holocaust, it's kind of interesting. Like after World War II, General Eisenhower starved 2 million German prisoners, and a lot of people have been asking why didn't the Germans do the same thing if they really wanted to kill the Jews? Which is not true. They were sent to slave labor camps, but they would just put them in the field and put them in wires and just let them starve and out in the cold and
Well, remember what the Germans were running were slave labor camps, not unlike the current U.S. Prison industrial complex. And the actual records that have survived show that the Germans took very good care of the people in those slave labor camps because the healthier and happier they were, the more productive they would be. And most people who are, indoctrinated with the Orthodox story of the Holocaust, they go to visit Auschwitz, and they're surprised to see that the prisoners there had swimming pools and athletic equipment. They had orchestras, cinemas, theaters, a bookstore. They even had a bordello, because they were actually paid for their labor in this camp script that they could then go and buy things they wanted for themselves, including, a little happy time on Saturday night. And, this is such a clash with what we get from Hollywood movies and everything. And I'm not justifying and saying it was okay. Slave labor is wrong no matter who is doing it to who. But from the German government's point of view, those were very valuable assets inside those camps. And if you ask any doctor to look at the pictures of the emaciated prisoners in those camps, they're going to say they're all suffering from typhus. When the Germans came back from the Russian front, they brought with them these major typhus epidemics that swept Germany, and Germany did not have the medical infrastructure to deal with it in the closing years of the war. That big crematorium in front of Auschwitz was actually built after the war was over. It was built by the Russians to dispose of those highly infectious corpses.
Last question, I'll let go, but what do you make about, because in the Holocaust they said they used Zyklon B and monoxide gas to kill the Jews. What do you make about that?
Well, Zyklon B is an insecticide, and it was used to kill the body lice that was the primary carrier of typhus from person to person. And everybody went through the delousing, including the German staff themselves. They would delouse the clothes and everything. There was an experiment a few years back where some German volunteers went into an enclosed room and they dumped Zyklon gas on them in a very high concentration. The bugs all died inside the room. Didn't hurt them at all. You need to remember, at the end of World War II, the Zionists were trying to basically go in and steal Palestine for their own use, but they were confronted with a world that had just united against Germany on the principle that one people don't have a right to take somebody else's country for their own use. So Israel needed a propaganda weapon that was so powerful it would convince all those nations that had united against Nazi Germany to get them out of France and Norway and everywhere else, to turn around and say, well, this one case, we got to let the Zionists steal Palestine and create the nation of Israel. And that was where all of this came from, and that's why they protect that deception as jealously as they do. Because if there was no deliberate program of extermination against the Jews, the entire rationale for stealing Palestine away and giving it to the Zionists collapses.
All right, thanks, Michael.
All right, thank you. We're going to switch over here to Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I got a couple of questions about what do you think with Bernie Sanders? I mean, do you think what he's proposing, being a socialist is good or bad? And, I have a running argument with my cousin on Facebook. He's an out-and-out communist. He's admitted. He says it.
Mm-hmm.
And he says and I'm surprised to hear you say that. He says that too, and I think how do you justify all the horrors committed under communism and all that?
Which horrors committed under communism?
Yeah, but that's what he said. He says Marx. Nobody really practiced the real communism.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, unfortunately, all governmental systems, whether it's capitalist, fascist, or socialist, it's only as good as the leaders at the top. And when you get people like, well, Stalin, they're going to do bad things. And Stalin would have been a real jerk, whether the Soviet Union was socialistic, fascistic, or capitalistic. Okay, and you need to separate the actions of these very, very bad rulers from the social and economic order in which they're operating.
But he seems to think that Trotsky and Lenin were actually good people. They meant well for people. I don't know. You know, I have a hard time.
I think they did start out with noble ambitions, just like the founding fathers of the United States, but over time, these systems get hijacked by people whose agenda is more wealth and greed for themselves. I mean, Thomas Jefferson, when the United States was started, Thomas Jefferson predicted it was not going to last more than 100 years before inevitable political corruption would require the American people to tear it all down and start all over again.
The other thing is, you know, what you were saying about, you know, the Holocaust now, what about, you know, even if we don't talk about the gas chambers, how about the pictures we see? And, you know, I watch History Channel quite a bit.
Yes.
And you actually see the Germans taking mostly Jews and some other people, mostly Jews, putting them in ditches and just shooting them point blank. And you get former Nazi soldiers admitting that they were doing stuff like that.
Yeah, well, you know, you need to go back and look at what happened to Rudolf Hess during the Nuremberg trials. I mean, they tortured him into saying what they wanted to have said, and there's been a lot of fakery. I mean, phony videos and films didn't start with ISIS, so you have to be really, really careful about that. Now, the Germans did shoot prisoners who tried to escape, and a lot of that did happen. We got to take a break for our top of the hour commercials and news, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Let's go ahead and take a phone call from Marduk up in Canada. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Good afternoon, Mike. Thank you for taking my call. Mike, with global oil pricing about $29-30 area, this is a third of what we had been paying not that long ago now. Yet I see no change in the supply chain. Our tires, you're paying full pop for a pair of tires. Fertilizer, food packaging, you name it. Anything with petroleum in it should be getting cheaper, and it should stimulate the economy. Instead,
well, it should be, but the oil companies are basically taking advantage of the situation of the lower oil prices to ramp up the profits. And we're, you know, at the consumer level, we're not seeing a huge amount of relief on gas prices. And you're absolutely right. Everything dependent on petroleum, including food delivery, supply chain, it's not coming down here. It's not coming down to the consumer level.
And you had mentioned that down there, you're thinking of putting a $10 tax on. Well, don't go down that route. That's what we did in Canada. Look at the tax we've got on our fuel, and when they do lower the price of oil, what does the Canadian government do? They just throw a bit more tax on there, and it's looking like our friends to the south are getting that same disease.
Oh yeah, it's just all about, you know, anytime there's any room to grab more money, they're going to do it because they're hopelessly broke and hopelessly in debt. And, you know, we're at the stage right now where governments are plundering their own nation and their own people, trying to keep the money junkies happy. You know, I personally think we've reached the point where we ought to be thinking about the solution that King Philip IV did when he was in hopeless trouble to the Templar bankers. You know, grab the bankers, torture them, burn them at the stake, right off the debt.
Well, I would agree with that. We should at least go back to using our own money. And in Canada, it's legal to do that, but we're part of the global family, so we're using the money borrowed at interest type of arrangement. But thank you, Mike.
Okay, now, are you familiar with the Comer lawsuit up there in Canada?
I've heard a little of it.
Okay, well, basically what it is, the charter for the Bank of Canada is technically owned by the Canadian people, but it is privately run. But part of its charter is the Bank of Canada is supposed to provide interest-free loans to government for infrastructure development. But starting back, I think it was in the 1970s, the Canadian government quit getting interest-free money from the Bank of Canada and started borrowing that money from private central bankers at interest and sticking the Canadian people with those interest payments. And it's a big stink, and the government of Canada is trying to shut this down. They've literally been censoring websites that are carrying this story, that are crossing the border into Canada. There's a block on that. And the Canadian government has literally ordered the Canadian media not to report on this story.
That sounds about right.
Well, we've got the same situation here in the United States. Our Constitution authorizes the federal government to coin and issue interest-free, debt-free money, and yet 3 times in our history, a corrupted government has sold us into the slavery of private central banks, which are given the authority to create and loan the public currency into circulation at interest.
They can keep this going for quite a while.
Well, until the people stand up with the tar and feathers and the rails and deal with the situation themselves. Okay, listen, Marduk, I got to let you go. We're running out of time here. I'm going to switch over to Guy in the San Fernando Valley. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. 2 things real quick. SoCal Gas says that they're going to give a 48-hour notice to people of Porter Ranch and families that have been dislocated to move back into their homes. In Granada Hills, I saw a sniffer truck running around sniffing for methane. That's about 15 miles out from Porter Ranch. They're out running around block to block sniffing the air.
Mm-hmm.
Brown seems to be involved with legislation against SoCal. So what assurances do the customers of natural gas have that the failure to modernize and maintain their equipment won't be passed on to customers?
Well, they've got no guarantee whatsoever. And yeah, any improvements, ultimately the people are going to pay for it one way or the other, either through higher gas bills or direct taxation. And the fact of the matter is that by allowing the infrastructure to decline, the eventual cost of replacement repair is going to be that much greater. They're looking at exactly the same thing in Flint, Michigan, where, this short-term solution of putting these chemicals in the water to try and deal with the toxins actually accelerated the decay of those water main pipes. They're going to have to be replaced now. And, ultimately the people are made to pay for all of these bad decisions.
Yeah, that's what they're saying publicly. They're going to pass it on.
Yep.
So I say we publicly take them on. Brown's going to have to take them on and say, you know what, you guys have been being paid money every month, year after year by these customers, and what have you done with that money?
Absolutely. Because, our infrastructure is collapsing all over the country. We've got the Porter Ranch gas leak. We had the Deepwater Horizon disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. Now we're hearing that the Indian Point nuclear power plant has had a serious radiation leak. I'm sure Ann Coulter's already on her way over there to assure us all that a little radiation is good for us. I mean, the country is crumbling because we've been in a wartime economy for over a decade now. And proper maintenance and upkeep of our national infrastructure has been neglected as unimportant.
Speaking of a wartime economy, you notice at the Republican convention that they asked, I think it was Bush and a couple other cronies about the selective service, but they didn't ask Trump. If Trump had jumped on there, he would have gone exactly the opposite way. He wouldn't have said, I don't want to see women in combat roles. But yet you see Cruz jumping on the bandwagon, or the only bandwagon, going against what Rubio and Bush had said.
Well,
so Trump didn't even get an option.
Yeah, the GOP debate was very clearly biased against Trump. We're going to be getting into that, in fact, right now. I want to talk about the candidates. So, Guy, I hope you're upwind from Porter Ranch, and the problem ultimately is methane is actually slightly heavier than the atmosphere. Yes, it comes up out of the ground, heading up into the sky under pressure, but eventually it settles back down onto the ground, and the same mechanism that traps the smog in the Los Angeles basin is also going to be trapping that methane. Now, methane does deteriorate over time. It blends with atmospheric oxygen, just like in the water, to produce water vapor and CO2. But this is a nasty, nasty problem. And like all these other problems, everybody wants to make it look like it's less of a problem. They're hiring public relations firms. They don't want to deal with the problem itself because it costs too much. It's just cheaper to lie to the public. So, Guy, thanks a lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. And getting on into the politics here, the GOP literally tried to rig this last debate against Donald Trump because Trump's campaign only got a few of the audience passes. Most of them went to Jeb Bush's supporters. So the audience was loaded up with Bush supporters who were there to just boo and jeer at Donald Trump and make it look like they all hated him. But it's basically they're rigging the debate to make him look bad. They're scared of him. Absolutely scared. That didn't stop the online polls after the debate from once again indicating Donald Trump was the winner of that debate. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, as you know, tomorrow is the New Hampshire primary, and everybody's going to go on and get out there and get out the vote despite an incoming snowstorm. I have a lot of family in New Hampshire. I spent my childhood in New Hampshire. I'm an old farm kid from up there. And right now, Trump's polling numbers actually improved after the debate, despite loading up the audience with Bush supporters to scream and shout at him. And basically, 33% of likely GOP voters said they support Trump. That gives him a 17-point lead over whoever is currently in second place, and that's flipping back and forth between Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. Trump has gained 5 points just over the last week. Let's see. Marco Rubio came in with 16% support. Ted Cruz has 14%. John Kasich, 11%. Everybody else is in single digits. Now, according to the latest Reuters Ipsos poll, Sanders and Clinton are tied nationally. Sanders is ahead of Clinton up in New Hampshire by a wide margin. And here's where it gets sticky. Election fraud can shift a result a few percentage points, but if you try and reverse Trump's 17-point lead, everybody knows what you did, especially in light of what is still coming out of Iowa. Now, I don't think it's really that Sanders is reaching the electorate so much as Democratic voters are starting to take an attitude of anybody but Hillary. Her scandals and dishonesty are catching up with her. People are just rejecting her. Now, over in Iowa, the Democratic Party of Iowa is still refusing to allow an audit or any kind of a recount. As attention is called to obvious discrepancies, they're correcting them. Hillary's lead over Sanders is now tissue paper thin. Apparently over in Grinnell Ward 1, the precinct where Grinnell College is located. Okay, I am for some reason somebody's trying to send me a video over Skype here. Anyway, over at Grinnell, 19 delegates were awarded to Bernie Sanders, 7 were awarded to Hillary Clinton based on the caucus. However, the Iowa Democratic Party decided to shift 1 delegate from Sanders to Clinton just to do it and did not notify the precinct secretary they had done so. The precinct secretary only discovered this happened the next day when he was checking the precinct results across the county. They were literally, the Iowa Democratic Party was stealing delegates from Sanders to give to Hillary Clinton. Now, here's an interesting story that shows you just how obvious the fraud is. Keen Schwartz was the only caucus goer to show up at Woodbury County number 43. He voted for Bernie Sanders. He was the only person who showed up. He voted for Bernie Sanders, but the Iowa Democratic Party's final results claim that Hillary Clinton won the delegate from that precinct. That's how obvious this is right now. Now, I've told you about blackboxvoting.org and Bev Harris, and she is getting some media coverage. And people are talking about election fraud, and people are very worried because New Hampshire is using the exact same electronic scan vote machine as appears at the very end of the HBO documentary Hacking Democracy. And in that documentary, they demonstrate that you can steal the election by rigging the little memory cards. The memory cards are given out by the central party, inserted into the machines, everybody has the election, the memory cards go back. There's no control and oversight to make sure the memory cards are being honest. And Bev Harris is saying, yeah, could be another steal in New Hampshire. And we know that back in 2008, when Hillary was running against Barack Obama, and everybody was saying that if she didn't win New Hampshire, her campaign was over. And going into the New Hampshire primary of 2008, Barack Obama was leading in the polls, and he was leading in the exit polls, and yet somehow, the very next day, there had been a miraculous come-from-behind victory by Hillary Rodham Clinton. And the corporate media tried to explain away the discrepancy between the official results and the exit polls by claiming that voters were lying to the exit pollsters. Which doesn't make any sense. When you walk out of your polling place and there's somebody doing an exit poll, you don't know who they are. You don't care what they think about you. You're not going to lie. But that was what was handed out last time. So Bev Harris is up there keeping an eye, and good for her. But again, if we see these amazing, huge reverses from the poll numbers, everybody's going to know what happened. The American voters are already suspicious these elections are being rigged. That makes it very dangerous to go on rigging them. Now, Hillary, I guess she's feeling desperate because she's now gone back to campaigning as a woman. And apparently yesterday she was on an interview up there in Town Hall at Henniker, New Hampshire, and said, it's difficult being a woman. I need your support because I'm a woman. And they're really ramping up the vagina vote. Apparently, Gloria Steinem came on out and said, don't worry, women are claiming to support Bernie Sanders only because they think it will help them attract boys. This is from Gloria Steinem. Madeleine Albright literally came out and said, women who refuse to support Hillary Clinton, there's a special place in the dark regions for you. And perhaps refreshingly, reassuringly, both Steinem and Albright were just being excoriated on social media. How dare you come on out and claim that women should vote for Hillary Clinton just because she's a woman? I mean, remember, back in 2008, the politically correct people insisted we elect a black president simply because he was black. And we got a huge surge in the national debt, huge surge in joblessness, carbon taxes, NSA spying, wars, and Obamacare. Now these same people are saying we should elect a woman president simply because she's a woman. Frankly, I think we need to raise our standards as to what's going on out there. All righty, we're going to grab a quick phone call. Mo in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thanks for taking my call, Michael. I just want to say I started listening to you a while back because you've got the speak truth to power, and you don't suck up to anybody, and I that's what's
except
so
Claire. I suck up to Claire all the time.
Well, I said, we're not talking about Claire. That's a special arrangement there. But as far as politics, I think I remember back in Michigan, there was a Michigan rally with Trump, and that protester mentioned the dancing Israelis and that the Israel did 9/11, and Trump knows this. And I know he's got a lot of Jewish connections with his daughter and his manager and all this stuff. But my question to you is this:
actually, could you hold your question for 4 minutes? We got to take a break here, okay? All right, I'm going to put you back on hold, and we'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to Mo in Florida, and sorry for the interruption, but we do have to sell some product to pay for the bills. electricity kibble for the technicians.
Never get tired of the music. I was just going to say that I know Trump, being a builder, especially a New York builder, he knows that those buildings didn't come down by airplane crashes, especially Building 7, and he knows what happened. I just wonder, he has been confronted about it. Sooner or later, he's going to have to answer. He definitely knows who did it. And my question is to you...
No, wait a minute. He may suspect something is wanky about how the buildings came down, but getting from there to Trump knowing who did it, that's a bit of a reach, again, because he's a political outsider. I'm sure everybody inside the U.S. government and the New York government knows what went down. I don't think we can say Trump knows who did it. I would agree that Trump probably has grounds to be suspicious.
What would you do, Michael, if you were running for president? What would you do? If you said it, if you mentioned it, you wouldn't have a chance. Would you speak truth to power and lay it on the line and realize you don't have a chance, or what would you do?
I would do what Trump is doing. I would basically go with what I think the voters are ready to listen to right now and stay away from things that are going to upset them. And yes, he's playing politics on that issue. But I think if Trump does become president, the forces arrayed against the 9/11 Truth movement are probably going to find themselves without much of a budget.
Yeah, well, I hope somebody runs this country that loves it. Like you said, America first. Thanks for taking my call, Michael.
All right, you got it. We're going to let you go. Now then, latest polls from New Hampshire, Sanders is leading Clinton 54 to 40%. That's a 14 percentage point lead. Okay, if that evaporates and is reversed, there is no question in my mind we are dealing with another crooked election. And again, Bev Harris is very concerned because they're using these electronic voting machines up in New Hampshire that were demonstrated on the HBO documentary Hacking Democracy are very easy to rig. Now, another story coming out of Huffington Post. Hillary is not being truthful about the Wall Street speaking fees. Anderson Cooper, when he was interviewing Hillary Clinton, was saying, did you have to be paid $675,000 for 3 speeches to Goldman Sachs? And Hillary said, well, I don't know, that's what they offered. But it turns out $225,000 per speech is her minimum fee. She's never accepted anything less than that. She's received $225,000 for 34 out of the 41 speeches listed on her tax return. Of the remaining 7, 2 were for $250,000, others for $265,000, $275,000, $285,000, $305,000, and $400,000 per speech. Talk about being a money junkie. Now, we are hearing that Kathleen Willey, who is a former White House volunteer who got groped by Bill Clinton when she was asking him for a paid position, is now going on the campaign trail against Hillary Clinton to remind everybody that Bill Clinton was a rapist, sexual abuser, and Hillary Clinton was his protector and enabler. And remember, at the same time Bill Clinton was groping Kathleen Willey, her husband, Ed Willey, a Bill Clinton fundraiser, was being arcanicided by a shotgun blast to his head and declared a suicide, even though there was no suicide note. Now, anybody who understands how big shotguns are, it's very, very difficult to shoot yourself in the head with them. Now, Kathleen Willey is out there to remind everybody that Bill Clinton has actually raped more women than Bill Cosby, but nothing has happened to him. Meanwhile, everybody in Hillary's inner circle is lawyering up. All of her top staffers, they're getting lawyers. They know something ugly is coming. Hillary may skate on all of this, but the FBI is going to fry somebody to prove that they're doing their job. And Hillary, in the last Democratic debate, was out there saying that she was confident nothing was going to happen. The FBI was just doing a security check. And that's not what the FBI does. The FBI does not ever conduct security reviews. They conduct criminal investigations. Former FBI agents are saying Hillary was being misleading about this. What the FBI is doing is a criminal investigation, not a security review. Hillary's in trouble. More and more people are beginning to say that. Rupert Murdoch is now out there floating Kerry as a last-minute substitute candidate to fill in when Hillary takes the big tumble. Now, remember what I said at the top of the show when Kerry was all of a sudden backing off saying, oh, we don't want war with Russia. Kerry may be getting ready to position himself as an anti-war candidate. And that's why all of a sudden the sudden switch. Oh, it's all the fault of the rebel groups. They won't talk. Sudden change like there. Iowa was a tie. In fact, it's looking more and more like Sanders probably actually won it. If Hillary loses tomorrow in New Hampshire, it's pretty much over and done with. Same situation she faced in 2008. Right now, Sanders is 14 points ahead of Hillary. And Hillary cannot steal New Hampshire without everybody knowing that that's exactly what just happened. Now, Hillary has dragged her husband, Bill Clinton, former President Bill Clinton, into the campaign, and he's launched a stinging attack on Bernie Sanders, calling him dishonest. There's the pot calling the kettle black. I'm not sure Bill Clinton is actually going to help Hillary's campaign, just like I'm convinced bringing George W. Bush into Jeb Bush's campaign is not going to help. But we're looking at some people who are desperate and thrashing around. Now, Jeb Bush has decided he's going to try and revive his chances to be president by sucking up to the war party. The U.S. must act more aggressively against Daesh in Libya. Syria's lost at this point. We can go into Libya. Okay, Jeb, here's your rifle. Here's your parachute. Here's your day-glow orange jumpsuit. Now, of course, tomorrow it's not going to be easy for people to get to the polls. There's a winter storm warning in effect. They're expecting 8 inches of snow. That's significant. But it's a funny thing about inclement weather. People who want to vote for somebody, it's easy to get them to stay home. People who want to vote against somebody, they'll get out there, regardless of the weather conditions. And the Nashua City Clerk is expecting a 65% voter turnout for the primary. So we'll see what's going to happen there. Now, for some reason, Erdogan is over in Ecuador making speeches. And apparently somebody in the audience, female protesters, shouted murderer at him. And apparently Erdogan's people grabbed these Ecuadorian citizens and treated them quite roughly. So Ecuador has summoned the Turkish ambassador to formally protest this abridgment of their right to freedom of speech. Over in Europe, we're seeing more and more of these organized anti-refugee rallies taking place all across Great Britain and the European Union. It's called the Pegida movement, and it is growing rapidly. Now, here's a very interesting story. This is in Washington's blog. Apparently, polling organizations from both Republican and Democratic side are coming up with a result. Never has public trust and faith in the government ever been lower. They're using the phrase pre-revolutionary mood. More when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, between the years of 2001 and 2015 last year, Bill and Hillary Clinton made a total of $153 million just making speeches. So anybody who says the Clintons are just like the rest of us, that's nonsense. They've got numerous, very fine homes. They're very, very wealthy. And they didn't make that off of Secret Service salaries. When you're being paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for a speech, or when you get a multi-million-dollar advance on a book deal, that's the payoff. Oh, we didn't bribe the Clintons with $400,000 for doing so. Yeah, we just paid that money for a speech. It's all above board and honest. Certainly, certainly, certainly. Now, before we went to the commercial break, I was teasing this story that came out of Washington's blog about how pollsters for both Republican and Democratic parties and political strategists looking at polling data are getting very, very alarmed. And they're using the phrase pre-revolutionary mood. Less than 1 in 5 Americans think the government has the consent of the governed. Government corruption is the thing Americans fear most. 3 times as many Americans supported King George during the Revolutionary War than support our own Congress today. 84% of all Americans think our leaders are more interested in protecting their own wealth and power than doing what is right. 81% believe the power of ordinary people to control the country is getting weaker every day. Again, blackboxvoting.org. 80% of Americans believe the federal government is its own special interest group looking out for itself. 78% of Americans believe the Democratic and Republican parties are essentially useless in changing anything because both parties are too obligated to special interests. 76% of Americans agree with the statement, America cannot succeed unless we take on and defeat the corruption and crony capitalism in our government. 3/4 of Americans believe the U.S. government is not working for the people's best interests. And on and on and on. And again, very alarming, the conclusion of these pollster groups. The country is in a pre-revolutionary mood. Now, I don't like the idea of a revolution, because if there's one thing the U.S. government knows how to do really well, it's kill people. And I'm finding myself very much sympathetic to Mel Gibson's character in The Patriot, where revolution is coming, and he's saying, I don't want to do it. It's going to be fought in our front yards. We're going to see it with our own eyes, and a lot of people are going to die. And I'm very concerned about that. But I understand, and I respect the opinions of those who think revolution is coming. Now then, getting on to the immigration refugee crisis. Over in Italy, angry citizens are demanding a crackdown on the illegal alien invaders pouring across the border. Europe is waiting for Angela Merkel's shocking reversal. They're expecting her to reverse her open borders policy, if for no other reason than to save her own political career. Because at the Pegida rally in Dresden, they were screaming, Merkel must go, Merkel must go, Merkel must go. Germany's spy agencies are confirming that many of these so-called refugees pouring into Germany are actually ISIS fighters. And then we have this story that I personally found to be disgusting in the extreme. And it's about a guy, Andre de Leon. He's a U.S. military veteran. He's 72 years old. He came to this country legally with his parents. He volunteered to fight in Vietnam. He served for 12 years and spent 2 full years overseas, was honorably discharged. Like many veterans, he suffers from depression, which was exacerbated when his mother passed away. And he got into illegal drugs, which was a bad thing to do. But there is apparently a little wrinkle in immigration law that if you are a naturalized U.S. citizen caught using illegal drugs, you can be deported. And so they're going to take this guy who has lived his entire life in this country, he's an honorably discharged U.S. veteran, and they're going to kick him out of the United States. While the illegal immigrants pour in from Mexico and refugees pour in from the Middle East. I think we're missing a sense of proportion here. There is no question in my mind that this guy should be allowed to stay, if for no other reason that the reason he got into illegal drugs is the VA isn't taking care of these people. Now this gets us to the story of Joe Biggs. And we're still waiting to get all the details on this. But apparently Sergeant Joe Biggs, who's a reporter for INFOWARS, got into a scuffle with a security guard at his residence, and we don't know what started it. But according to the video, the security guard was just trying to intrude into their home, got into a scuffle. The Austin Police Department showed up and pepper sprayed him and arrested him. And there's a couple of different videos of this out there. We don't know what caused the confrontation in the first place, who provoked it. We need to find out. But we need to pay attention to this because we understand that a lot of the INFOWARS reporters were being harassed up in Oregon. And those of us in the independent media, we have got to stand up for each other. Put our little petty differences aside here. We have to stand up for each other when they're being harassed. Maybe Joe Biggs did something, and as usual, the police overreacted. We're waiting to find out exactly what the circumstances were. But we have to make a big stink about this. Keep attention on it. Michael Moore has apparently been hospitalized. He's in intensive care dealing with pneumonia. I know what that feels like. He's still working from his hospital bed. And so we wish him well. Get well quick. He's working on a new movie, Where to Invade Next. I like a lot of Michael Moore's work. I don't agree with some of it. Blaming 9/11 on Saudi Arabia, I don't agree with that. The gun grab, I don't agree with it. I loved Roger and Me. Loved Canadian Bacon. And we wish him a speedy recovery and much success on his future endeavors here. Now then, interesting little story. Down in Crystal City, Texas, they had a recent meeting of the city council to which only one person showed up. Because apparently the FBI has arrested pretty much every other elected official in this town. Apparently for taking bribes and helping an illegal gambling operator in exchange for favors. This is reported in Associated Press. The FBI arrested the mayor, the city attorney, who's also the city manager, 2 current councilmen, and a former councilman. It's amazing. Now, over in West Virginia, they're proposing a new law. They're going to drug test welfare recipients, despite numerous studies that show this kind of thing is a complete waste of taxpayer money. So a legislator in West Virginia said, let's have a countermeasure, mandatory drug testing for lawmakers, saying that if any of the politicians test positive for drugs, they're not allowed to vote, and they're denied their pay. He wants mandatory drug testing of all legislators before every voting session. I think it's an idea whose time has come. I think we need this on the national level. Because some of the things those politicians are saying and doing, you have to wonder if they're sober and clear-headed. Welfare recipients, they're not in a position to harm the nation as a whole. Congressmen are. We should be drug testing them, especially with a government that is itself profiting from illegal drug trade. We got to take a break for our top-of-the-hour news and commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. We've got a caller on the line. Before I get to it, though, I'm not really heavily into the business of talking about movies and entertainment. I make exceptions occasionally, like Avatar. But over this last weekend, Claire and I caught a couple of movies that I think are worthy of mention. The first one was Bridge of Spies, directed by Steven Spielberg, starring Tom Hanks, which is a somewhat dramatized retelling of the story of how the prisoner swap was arranged by which Francis Gary Powers came back to the United States. And it's a very well-made movie, and it shows a lot of real politics, what was going on, the utter chaos during the establishment of the Berlin Wall, and all of that constant fear-mongering and hate being thrown back and forth to create the first Cold War. And for that reason, it's kind of worth looking at. The other one, and Claire and I really enjoyed this, is called Our Brand is Crisis, stars Sandra Bullock, and it's basically about how campaigns get run. It's set in South America, to sort of give it a little bit of artistic distance to what's going on here in the United States of America, covers a lot of the same territory that we saw in Wag the Dog, about the kinds of things that are done to influence votes and voters. And that one is definitely worth a watch. Our brand is Crisis. Alrighty, looks like our caller quit on the line there. Moving on to dictatorship, as it were. France has, while proclaiming freedom of speech for everybody except critics of Israel, actually gone the other way. And the government of France is now getting ready to pass a law to make conspiracy theories illegal by government decree. There is the official story, and that's it. And France is desperately trying to take the world, or at least France, back to the pre-internet days, 1950s and 1960s, where the government would tell the media what to tell you, the media would tell it to you, and you would have no choice but to believe it. They are realizing they've lost monopolistic control on the minds of their citizenry, and they think banning conspiracy theories is going to make it go away. The very least, rather the very most, they're going to drive it underground, which is where it was for most of its career anyway. But people are going to look at that law saying, wow, they don't want us, looking at alternative explanations for Charlie Hebdo and the Paris shooting or 9/11. I wonder if there's something there, and people will start digging. They're desperate to take us all back to the 1950s and 1960s, and it's not going to work because of the immense distrust in the population of all these nations, now aware of the massive scale of government lie, fraud, and deception. Alrighty, apparently the Department of Homeland Security is coordinating with local police departments to have license plate readers installed in shopping malls, on tow trucks, garbage trucks, to spy on us all and keep track of where we are at all times. The surveillance state is definitely here. Now, as you know, much of the current NSA, we spy on everybody, is built on an earlier system called Echelon that goes back to the 1980s. And it was 5 countries got together, U.S., Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand, and I forget the other one that was involved in that, basically evading their privacy laws by spying on each other's citizens and then just trading the data. Well, now the British government wants to connect their computer spy systems to the U.S. computer spy systems so that they can access U.S. data whenever they want to. Private data. They want it all. Now, over in Maryland, their Attorney General is responding to criticism of the use of stingrays and warrantless surveillance, and he's out there saying, well, if you don't want to be tracked, you can turn off your phone. That's the solution. But if you turn off that phone, you are fair game. Ever hear of that Fourth Amendment to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights? More and more we're seeing how government at all levels has just completely abandoned the idea that they're bound by the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And of course, to my mind, that makes them illegal, illegitimate governments. Because the legal, legitimate government of the United States of America derives its power and authority from that Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and they are bound by its rules. And if they don't want to play by the rules, they should seek gainful employment elsewhere. A lot of roads in this country need to have holes filled. Now, some hacker, and this is a case where hacking may not be a bad thing, somebody hacked into the U.S. government's own computers and got the phone numbers, names, titles, and contact information addresses on 9,000 employees of the Department of Homeland Security, put it up online. They are promising to release 20,000 FBI files. And basically on FBI employees. Now, according to Motherboard, they've looked at some of the data and they say it does appear to be genuine. And I think this is a good thing. Sauce for the goose. Now they're all going to understand why we are so angry about the NSA snooping on us. And I'm sure their attitude is going to be, well, we have to snoop on you, but you can't snoop on us. We're above that sort of thing. We're the government. Apparently, some of the recent moves in the ruble, dramatic ones, were not the result of economics, but of computer hacking. Somebody got into a Russian regional bank and was able to shift the ruble-dollar rate more than 15% in minutes. And this would be a classic case of follow the money. Who made a killing in a sudden foreign exchange deal involving the dollar and the ruble? I think we need to get off all these computers and go back to using cash, which they're trying to make illegal. But you realize what a problem it is for the National Security Agency? They backdoored everything, our cell phones, our tablets, our laptops, our computers and everything, and all of a sudden people aren't using those anymore. We're actually talking to each other out there in the real world. How do we backdoor human tongues? How do we wiretap an ear? I'm sure they're thinking about that. Now, Twitter may have shot itself in the proverbial foot. According to an article over in BuzzFeed, Twitter is planning to launch a Facebook-style algorithm to decide what content they will allow to appear on your timeline. If it's something they don't think should be there, like, criticisms of Israel or Hillary Clinton, it simply won't show up. Needless to say, Twitter's users are in an absolute fury over this. And I think that if Twitter actually goes ahead and does this, that will be the end of Twitter. Because Twitter's attraction was being able to communicate with everybody what you were thinking. And Twitter wants to say, we'll let you talk if you say things we agree with. And nobody's going to waste their time on that. Nobody's going to bother with yet another filtered social media system. Now, over in Utah, the Fusion Center is out there warning police that there could be trouble from all those people going up to Finnecum's funeral, the man who got basically shot down in cold blood with a gun, and they planted a gun on him that doesn't trace to him. It was an outright assassination, and people are getting ready to go to the funeral. And the Utah Fusion Center is out there saying that anybody carrying the Gadsden flag with the snake, don't tread on me, should be automatically treated as a potential terror suspect. Now, a lot of people have those flags who are not terror. I have one of those flags. I bought one of those flags for my neighbor who was the master of the local Masonic temple because they did Flag Day for history. He wasn't a terrorist either. We got to be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're getting reports that apparently Israel has launched an air attack into Syria. And we put up a link to that at WhatReallyHappened.com. But apparently loud explosions in Kaahumanu, more attacks near Damascus, at least 7 targets hit so far. And apparently Israeli aircraft targeted Syrian government ammunition depot in Haifa. So it looks like the invasion of Syria is being started as we speak. Now, getting on back to things computer. Another positive hack. Somebody broke into the servers of the Fraternal Order of Police. This is the country's largest law enforcement union. And they dug out the contracts the union signs between police and city authorities and found out most of them contain guarantees that disciplinary records and complaints made against officers are kept secret or even destroyed. It's in the union contract. Complaints against police have to be hidden. That explains an awful lot. Over in Minnesota, concealed carry applications have surged by more than 6,000 in January alone. There are currently 221,000 active permit holders in Minnesota. So they're arming up over there. And by the way, Minnesota ranks in the top 5 most peaceful states, according to various sources. Now, despite the recent court ruling in Maryland about assault rifles, Obama is still talking about a ban, a total ban on all assault rifles. You know, the Second Amendment means you can have a musket. That's basically it. They're afraid of us. Maybe. Remember we talked the other day about how George Soros is funding the gun grabber movement, but he owns stock in the gun companies, so every time the gun grabbers open their mouth and people start buying guns, Soros is making money. Turns out he's not alone. According to a report published by Reuters on February 5th, President Obama owns stock in a couple of gun and ammunition manufacturers. So every time he talks about banning guns, he's making money. And the question I have is, I thought the president's wealth was supposed to be in a blind trust. Remember, that was a big stink back during the Clinton administration, Bill Clinton's administration. That the blind trust was 6 months late. The guy in charge of putting it all together was Vince Foster. And one of the reasons that he may have been planning on resigning was he didn't want to sign a trust declaration he knew to be fraudulent, because then he would go to jail. Then he got really depressed, and his body was found in Fort Marcy Park. And 3 days after his death, the trust declarations were completed and sent to the trustee by an unknown party. And by the way, Hillary's fingerprints were found on some of that paperwork. So let's get on down and talk about Flint, Michigan. There's a very telling article from Op-Ed News. Flint's crisis is about more than the water. And it's talking about government knowingly allowing children to be drinking toxic water that permanently impairs their brains. Why did they do it? Money. And the crisis in Flint is more ominous than simply the lead-contaminated water. It is a symptom of the collapse of our society. Corporate power is not held accountable for its crimes. Remember, this was all done by the emergency manager, who was not an elected official. And he's refusing to testify before Congress. It's the attitude of the corporations. We can do whatever we want. Government can't say a thing about it. And by the way, those are principles enshrined in the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, that corporations are above the laws of sovereign nations. Hillary Clinton apparently did an appearance in Flint trying to support and prop up the embattled local government over this issue. And apparently up in New Jersey, a brick man, city of Brick, formerly served as the licensed operator for the New Brunswick and Milltown public drinking water systems, has been sentenced to 3 years in state prison for submitting false water purity information to the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. This is not just Flint. It's New Jersey. It's Ohio. It's parts of New Orleans. It's Boston, Baltimore. It's all over, everywhere. They're treating us like they treat the Native Americans, because it's been a problem over there for a while. Story coming out of the Free Thought Project. Water contamination is a way of life on the Native American reservations. They've been dealing with toxic runoff from uranium mining. And by the way, if you ever saw the Val Kilmer film Thunderheart, that was part of the storyline. That uranium mines were simply dumping their toxins into the water supply for the Native Americans to drink. And that's what life is like under corporate rule. They don't care about you. If they make you sick, sell you more medicines. Now, up at Indian Point Nuclear Plant, they're having some problems. 2 years ago, they were fined for falsifying safety records. 9 months ago, they had a transformer explode. And this nuclear reactor is just 37 miles from downtown Manhattan. 2 months ago, they had to shut down the number 2 reactor after a major power outage cut power to several of the control rod systems. Now they're learning that radioactive tritium-contaminated water has leaked into the groundwater in Westchester County. Now the plant's owner is saying, there's no problem. perfectly safe, nothing to worry about. They said exactly the same thing when Fukushima first blew. They said the same thing when 3 Mile Island had their problem. It's not a problem. Don't worry about it. Now, tritium has a half-life of 12.3 years. It is a beta particle emitter, which means if the water is on your outside, the radioactive particles will penetrate the skin and get inside. If you drink the water contaminated with tritium, the tritium can remain behind. And it's got a half-life of 12.3 years. The only good news in all of this is that when tritium does decay, it decays to non-radioactive helium. It's not like some other isotopes that go from being one really nasty isotope to another really nasty isotope. But still in all, this is just out of control. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Another story about the terrible way this government treats veterans. Okay? This is being reported on Fox News over in St. Louis. A gentleman named Emil Limpert. And he submitted an application for benefits to the Department of Veterans Affairs. And because he needs financial help. He's down to nothing. And he earned a Purple Heart in the Philippines. He was in a foxhole. Shell fell into it. 2 of the people were killed. 3rd guy lost his leg. Emil suffered multiple cuts for which he was given the Purple Heart. The Veterans Affairs Department has written him back saying they're denying his application because they can't find a record of his being in the military. Now, we know what good record keepers the VA has been, and they're basically saying we can't find a record of you, therefore you're not entitled to benefits, you're on your own. It's absolutely shameful. Whether you agree with the wars or not, and I don't, we as a nation do owe a debt of honor to everybody who put that uniform on and came back wounded to take care of them. And all we keep hearing out of the Department of Veterans Affairs is everybody gets put in a whole pattern, months to get any help at all. They're just hoping everybody will die and go away because they've run out of money. All the money is being focused on starting the war and not dealing with its aftermath. Story coming out of Natural News, calling attention to the fact that the vaccine industry does not publicize any statistics of children who are harmed or killed by vaccines. They don't count. All the statistics are out there saying, oh, vaccines are wonderful, they're going to do this and they're going to do that. And there's a gigantic cover-up going on regarding children who have been harmed by the vaccines, children who've been given a vaccine for an illness who immediately come down with that very illness from which they've died. This is life under corporate rule. Your health and safety aren't a factor. Just how much money can they get out of you? Now, earlier in the show, I was talking about how the government of France is going to pass a law to make conspiracy theories illegal. There's the official story, and that will be it. Freedom of speech does not include questioning the official story of anything. And they're trying to take everybody back to the 1950s, 1960s, when government would tell the media what to tell you, the media would tell it to you, and you would have no choice but to believe them. And they are clearly scared of the fact that they have lost control of the minds of their populations. And one of the things that they could do to regain the trust of the people in the government and the media is start to tell the truth. But they can't do that. They're trapped by decades of mendacity that would unravel the instant they admit that they lied to us about anything. That's why they steadfastly maintain all the official lies, even though we all know they're lying, and frankly, they look pretty foolish standing up there and continuing to put that on out there. Russia stole Crimea. We know it's a lie. The Crimean people voted to leave Ukraine and then voted to merge with Russia. No, Russia took Crimea. You've got to believe the official story. I don't have to believe a thing coming out of this government. You show me where in the Constitution it mandates the people must believe anything the government says. It's not in there. Also not in the Constitution is the authority for the government to lie to the people. That's not in there, and the 10th Amendment prohibits the government from assuming such an authority. So what the government and the corporate media have been trying to do against us in the independent media is try and make us look kooky and silly so that people will go back to watching ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, CNN, BBC. And some of it's pretty obvious. The fake Apollo moon landings, chemtrails, HAARP, no plane at the Pentagon, constant. But they've really sort of pulled out all the stops with this flat earth nonsense. And I am getting bombarded with this stuff all the time. You've got to put this on your website. Well, it's my website, and I don't put nut stuff, government propaganda, on my website. But it's really out there. And believe it or not, last year when National Geographic ran its article about why people don't trust scientists anymore, the flat earth was one of the things they put in there to show just how incredibly silly the internet is and how you should never go over there and listen to anything they say. So anything that's out there on the internet that is really wacko and kooky, it's bought and paid for propaganda. It's called poisoning the well. It's a propaganda tactic. It's called poisoning the well, and they're trying to do it. And they're spending huge amounts of your tax dollars trying to swindle you back into believing the official story. UFOs, space aliens, Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster. And they got to be pretty desperate to try and make anybody think that anybody thinks the earth is flat. It's absurd in the extreme. But it betrays the desperation that they're in right now. Nobody trusts the government. Nobody trusts the corporate media. And they don't know what to do about it because they can't start telling the truth. They're trapped by the web of their own lies. We all know how this is ultimately going to end. Now, story coming out of theinquisitor.com. NASA's Spirit rover may have found hints of alien life on Mars. And they're talking about some features that they saw on the camera that seem to be similar to shapes on Earth produced by biological activity. And it's all well and good, but I'd like to remind everybody again that back in 1976, the Viking landers did find evidence of current indigenous microbial life on Mars. There were two experiments. Labeled release experiment designed by Dr. Gilbert Levin. We've had him on the show. And this was an adaptation of a system used here on Earth to test civil water systems for bacterial contamination. You put a sample of the water or Martian soil in this nutrient solution tagged with radioactive carbon, and you wait for something in the soil or water to burp, and that effluent is radioactive and a detector detects it, and you'd say, aha, there's something alive in there. The second experiment was the gas chromatograph mass spectrometer, which took a sample of the Martian soil, heated it, looked for recognizable organic molecules. It produced a negative. Now, NASA was under a lot of political pressure from people who did not want there to be life on Mars because it meant Earth wasn't special and the imaginary playmate in the sky wasn't sitting up nights to admire us all. So NASA, which stands for Never a Straight Answer, threw away Dr. Levin's positive result, went with the GCMS. Now, scientists in other countries have looked at the raw data and said the positive result from the labeled release experiment is convincing. And we have since found out from later landers that the Martian soil contains a high amount of what are called perchlorates. And perchlorates will destroy organic molecules on contact. So the design of the Viking GCMS, it could never have worked. It was destroying any organic molecules it found before they could be detected. So what we have from Viking is a positive result for life and a totally bogus negative result. And, of course, NASA doesn't want to admit that they were wrong. And look at how hard Richard Feynman had to work to get NASA to admit Challenger's O-rings were the cause of the crash. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we were talking about the latest in this maybe, could be, sort of my story about life on Mars. And it's very aggravating because, again, Viking found indigenous microbial life. It detected it. And why aren't they sending a microscope up there? And the reality is there have been a lot of very strange things imaged on Mars by the various rovers, which are always explained away. Oh, it's a bit of plastic, this, a little that. There was that the thing they called the crab, which nobody went back to take a closer look at it. The little round objects they're calling the blueberries are remarkably similar to hard crust bacterial colonies here on Earth. And I think there's a political desire not to acknowledge the finding of life on Mars, because then we might all decide that, hey, let's stop doing wars and unite together to go to Mars and see who else is out there in the universe. Remember when Marco Polo first came back from China, he was thrown in a dungeon by the Dominicans because the church leadership was just terrified of Europeans finding out there was another civilization out there that hadn't even heard of Jesus, was a threat to their power and control. They wanted to keep it hidden. They weren't able to keep it hidden for all that long, whereupon the church tried to Christianize China, sometimes through force of arms. Rulers don't want you to learn new things that might change how you see the world. And the confirmation of life on another world, even microbial life, is going to be a globally transformative event. And I think everybody would say, yeah, let's stop all this bombing of each other and let's go on out there and see what else is out there in the local neighborhood. And like I said, back on Viking, tremendous political pressure coming on down, not to say that there was life on Mars. So, looks like in March, there will be an asteroid flying past Earth, estimated to miss us by just 11,000 miles, just slightly over the radius of Earth itself. They're not exactly sure, because apparently the asteroid's been lost in the glare of the sun. The asteroid is called 2013 TX68. And so that'll be interesting. Might even be a visible, naked eye object if it's close enough. Nobody is saying it's going to hit. Don't get upset. Let's see. Okay. I'm getting an update on the Joe Biggs case saying that he has been released. And nobody's saying, though, what the original situation was. Let's see. Almost half of newly issued California driver's licenses went to illegal immigrants. Getting on back to science, it has now come out that the ancient Babylonians understood geometry. And that puts the development of geometry centuries earlier than originally thought. And apparently they were using geometry to track the motions of the planets, specifically Jupiter, which is a very important object in the sky. I think we've probably forgotten more history than we really appreciate there. Anita Collins over in this YouTube video is saying playing a musical instrument benefits your brain. And that's another reason why we should not be cutting arts funding in our schools. Of course, if you're running an education system where you don't want kids to have better brains, then of course getting rid of arts makes a huge amount of sense. Another little story coming out of the Daily Mail. Anger changes the brain. Aggression causes new nerve cells to grow that trigger more rage in the future. And this actually makes a lot of sense. That by the time you're in your 20s, you've got the personality you're going to have for the rest of your life. And a lot of that has to do with your early development. Because your brain is not static. It's constantly changing. And it's growing neurons to meet the needs of the immediate experience that you're going through. So, anyway, let's see. Now, over in India, for the first time in recorded history, there's been a report of a death from meteorite strike. And apparently Indian media is saying that there was an explosion on university grounds in the southern town of Vellore. It shattered windows, and it killed a bus driver and injured 3 others. The police bomb squad was looking at a hole 3 feet in diameter, and of course, no evidence of a bomb blast at the site, and according to witnesses, they saw the meteorite come down. Prior to this, there was one incident of a woman here in the United States being hit by a meteor, which sparked a huge argument between her and her landlord who owned it, because fresh meteorites can be extraordinarily valuable objects. All right, so we're coming up here on the end of the show. Tomorrow's going to be the primary in New Hampshire, and if you are in New Hampshire, please make a point of getting out to the polls. And if you are not in New Hampshire, please copy off my articles on Hillary the Spy and the Epic of Clinton's Mess, and forward them to everybody that you do know inside New Hampshire. And we need to get that vote out. Now, Trump has a 17-point lead on Rubio. Sanders has a 14-point lead on Clinton. And if those are reversed in tomorrow's New Hampshire primary, the inescapable conclusion is the elections are a complete, total fraud. And I maintain that if a government cannot prove the accuracy, honesty, and fairness of the elections by which they claim authority over us, then we, the people, are neither legally nor morally obligated to obey that government, to pay its bills, and certainly not to sacrifice life and limb of our children in their wars of conquest. The vote riggers, the election stealers, are literally risking what's left of the legitimacy of the United States federal government the more they play their games. For Iowa to already be discredited at the very start of the primary season, it's very telling. The voters are suspicious. They're questioning. And again, if you have not seen it, HBO documentary, Hacking Democracy, we've got the end part where they actually rig the results of one of those optical scan machines. That's on WhatReallyHappened.com. And you need to visit blackboxvoting.org, Bev Harris's website. She has just done an heroic job of trying to call attention to the massive election fraud in this country, which to date, for the most part, is still ignored by the corporate media. And any time there is an instance of election fraud detected that is newsworthy, we can count on the corporate media to say, well, it didn't change the final outcome, which is an absolutely impossible statement to support, because you can't know that you found all the vote fraud, and if you don't know that you have found all the vote fraud, you've got absolutely no foundation for saying it didn't change the final outcome. Because anybody who's engaging in election fraud, their goal is to change the outcome. But we can count on the corporate media to cover up for the vote riggers. Remember, that central tabulator for the National Elections Voters News Service is owned by the TV networks and 2 important national newspapers, the Washington Post and the New York Times. It is not subject to civilian oversight or government oversight of any kind. They just count the votes and they tell you who your rulers are, and you're supposed to just accept that on face value. But when you look at how the TV networks and newspapers lie to you about Saddam's nuclear weapons, why should we believe them as to who wins the elections? There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. Got to do Jim Goddard's show up in Vancouver. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Aloha, America.